By the summer of 1945, the Empire of Japan was already dying. Its cities lay open to the sky, stripped of defenses and turned into furnaces by nightly American firebombing. Tokyo smoldered under layers of ash, Osaka's factories were twisted wreckage. Kobe's harbor was a graveyard of steel, millions were homeless, food was scarce. Air raid sirens had become the metronome of daily life. Yet amid this unraveling world, the nation still revolved around a man most citizens had never heard speak and whose silence carried terrifying weight. What almost no one could see was how close that silence was to breaking. Emperor Hirohito resided within the Imperial Palace, surrounded by ritual, protocol, and an aura of divinity that had endured for centuries. He was not merely a ruler, he was believed to be sacred, descended from the sun goddess Amaterasu, the living embodiment of Japan itself. To question him was to question the cosmos, and yet, unlike the emperors of legend, Hirohito ruled quietly. He observed conferences, received reports, and asked measured questions. Orders emerged, but rarely in his voice. Power flowed around him like water around stone. This distance was not accidental. It protected the throne and perhaps the nation from responsibility. As the war deteriorated, Japan's leadership fractured into factions trapped between ideology and reality. Civilian officials saw the inevitable. Military leaders clung to honor, sacrifice, and the belief that endurance itself could force better terms. War Minister Korechika Onami spoke of national spirit and final battles. Prime Minister Kantaro Suzuki spoke of exhaustion and survival. And at the center sat the emperor, inscrutable, knowing that even a slight gesture from him could tip the fate of millions. The question no one dared ask aloud was whether the divine sovereign would ever intervene. By June 1945, the Battle of Okinawa had answered one question brutally. The island fell after catastrophic losses, placing American forces within direct striking distance of the Japanese home islands. Civilian suicides shocked even hardened generals. The illusion of a bloodless defense collapsed. Still, no surrender came. The machinery of war continued, grinding forward, driven less by strategy than by inertia and fear of dishonor. And yet, inside the palace walls, something was shifting. Hirohito studied casualty reports. He listened to briefings describing cities erased in a single night. He asked scientists about new weapons rumored to be under development by the Americans. His diaries, written in clipped, clinical language, recorded concern not for victory, but for extinction. Japan, as a civilization, stood on the edge of something irreversible. If the emperor spoke, the war could end. If he remained silent, Japan might burn itself out of existence. As summer deepened, internal meetings grew more desperate. The Supreme War Council debated possibilities that bordered on fantasy-mediated peace, conditional surrender, miraculous intervention. No one wanted to be the first to say what everyone knew: the empire could not win. The emperor listened, he said little, and the absence of his voice allowed the war to continue. Outside the palace, American bombers filled the night sky. Inside, history waited for a single sentence that might never come. And then, in early August, a weapon unlike any the world had ever known was prepared for use, one that would force the emperor to choose between silence and survival. If you're finding this kind of deep, character-driven history compelling, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. It helps more people discover stories that explore not just what happened, but why it mattered. By the time the first atomic bomb was loaded onto a B-29 bomber, Emperor Hirohito still had not spoken publicly about ending the war. And when the flash came, it would shatter far more than a city. On the morning of August 6, 1945, a single American B-29 bomber appeared over Hiroshima, high above the city, almost unnoticed. Air raid alarms had become routine. Many citizens did not bother to seek shelter. Then at 8:15 a.m., the sky ignited. In an instant, a blinding flash erased streets, homes, schools, and hospitals. Tens of thousands died before they could understand what had happened. Hiroshima ceased to exist as a functioning city. Within hours, fragmented reports reached Tokyo, but even Japan's leaders struggled to comprehend them. At first, military officials doubted the scale. They suspected exaggeration or a new kind of conventional bomb. Scientists were dispatched, communications failed. Survivors described as sun falling from the sky. As the truth emerged, the implications were terrifying. A single aircraft had destroyed an entire city. And the Americans had more planes, yet still, Japan did not surrender. Inside the Supreme War Council, arguments hardened rather than softened. Some generals insisted the weapon was singular, a psychological ploy. Others argued that even if the Americans possessed more, Japan must endure the sacrifice. To surrender under such conditions, they claimed, would betray the spirits of the dead. The logic of honor continued to overpower the logic of survival. 3 days later, on August 9th, a second atomic bomb obliterated Nagasaki. The same day, an even older nightmare arrived. The Soviet Union, Japan's last imagined mediator, declared war and invaded Japanese-held territory in Manchuria. Overnight, any hope of negotiating peace through Moscow collapsed. Japan now faced annihilation from east and west, air and land, future and past. For the first time, the inner circle could no longer avoid the inevitable. An emergency Imperial conference was convened. The atmosphere inside the chamber was suffocating. 6 men spoke endlessly, trapped in a deadlock between surrender and resistance. 3 favored ending the war, 3 demanded continuation, even if it meant national suicide. The debate circled endlessly, words piling atop words, while outside the palace the nation burned. Then something unprecedented happened. Emperor Hirohito broke the stalemate. In a calm, measured voice, he spoke of the devastation already inflicted upon his people. He spoke of the new and cruel bomb that threatened the extinction of the Japanese nation. He spoke of the duty to preserve civilization itself. To continue the war, he said, would mean not honor but annihilation. For centuries, emperors had ruled without speaking in such councils. Now, the divine sovereign had chosen a side. The deadlock was broken. The government agreed reluctantly to accept the Allied Potsdam Declaration, provided the imperial institution itself could be preserved. Orders were issued, preparations for surrender began. But agreement on paper did not mean safety in reality. Not everyone accepted the emperor's decision. That night, a group of junior officers launched a desperate coup attempt. Their objective was chillingly precise: seize the imperial palace, locate the emperor's recorded surrender speech, and destroy it before it could be broadcast. Without the recording, they believed, the war could still be saved. Soldiers moved through the palace grounds under cover of darkness. Telephone lines were cut. Confusion spread among guards who did not know whom to obey. Hirohito's closest aides hid the fragile lacquer discs containing his voice, moving them from room to room as armed men searched nearby corridors. At any moment, a single confrontation could have plunged Japan back into war. As dawn approached, loyal forces regained control. The rebels faltered, unable to locate the recording or secure the emperor himself. One by one, they surrendered or took their own lives. The coup collapsed quietly, leaving behind no victory, only exhaustion and dread. The emperor's voice had survived the night, but it had not yet been heard. And when it finally was, it would end a war and transform the meaning of the throne forever. On August 15, 1945, radios crackled across Japan as citizens gathered in homes, factories, and bomb shelters. Many did not know what they were about to hear, only that the emperor himself would speak. For most Japanese, Hirohito was a distant, almost mythical presence, glimpsed only in photographs or described through ritualized language. His voice, if it existed at all, belonged to another realm. When it came, it was calm, formal, and unmistakably human. Speaking in archaic court Japanese, Hirohito announced that the empire had accepted the terms of surrender. He did not use the word defeat, but the meaning was unmistakable. The war, he said, had developed not necessarily to Japan's advantage. The people were instructed to endure the unendurable, to bear the unbearable so that future generations might survive. Across the nation, silence followed. Some wept openly, others bowed instinctively toward the radio. Many did not fully understand the words, but they understood the consequence. The divine sovereign had ordered surrender. A belief system built over centuries cracked in a single broadcast. And yet, something even more dangerous loomed. In the days that followed, Allied forces prepared to occupy Japan. General Douglas MacArthur arrived as supreme commander, wielding authority over a defeated nation of more than 70 million people. To many outside observers, the next step seemed obvious: arrest the emperor, try him. Execute him alongside the generals and ministers who had led Japan into catastrophe. Instead, MacArthur made a decision that would shape the post-war world. He chose to preserve the emperor. American occupation authorities concluded that removing Hirohito could shatter social order, provoke mass resistance, or drive the population toward extremist movements. The throne, stripped of power but preserved as a symbol, could anchor stability while Japan was rebuilt from ruins. Responsibility for the war would be assigned to military leaders, not the man at the center of the system. Hirohito remained on the throne, but survival came at a cost. In January 1946, the emperor issued a declaration that shattered the spiritual foundations of Imperial Japan. He publicly renounced his divinity, stating that the bonds between ruler and people were not based on myth or divine descent. The living God stepped down into humanity, collapsing a belief structure older than recorded history. The transformation did not end there. Hirohito began appearing in public, touring devastated cities, factories, farms, and schools. He wore simple clothing, he shook hands, he listened. These gestures, mundane elsewhere, were revolutionary in Japan. A man once shielded by layers of ritual now stood face to face with the people who had suffered under his reign. At the same time, the Tokyo war crimes trials unfolded. Generals, admirals, and ministers were prosecuted. Some were executed, others received life sentences. Throughout the proceedings, one absence loomed larger than any conviction. The emperor was never charged. For critics abroad, this omission was unforgivable. For supporters at home, it was necessary. For historians, it became an enduring fault line, one that would never fully heal. Hirohito had ended the war. He had survived the collapse of empire. But the question of his responsibility had only begun. If you value documentary storytelling that examines history's moral gray zones, consider subscribing and liking the video. It helps these deeper, quieter stories reach the audiences who appreciate them most. As Japan rebuilt under a new constitution and foreign occupation, the emperor receded once more into careful silence. And the longer he lived, the more his survival itself became the story. Japan in the post-war years was a nation unrecognizable from the empire that had fallen in 1945 under American occupation. Political power was dismantled and rebuilt from the ground up. A new constitution transformed the emperor from sovereign ruler into a symbol of the state present, revered, but powerless. War was formally renounced, civil rights were enshrined. And through it all, Emperor Hirohito remained, quietly occupying a throne emptied of authority but heavy with memory. For many, his continued presence was stabilizing. For others, it was deeply unsettling. As the occupation ended in 1952, Japan regained sovereignty and surged into recovery. Cities rose from rubble, industry boomed, democracy, fragile but real, took root. Hirohito performed his ceremonial duties with meticulous care, avoiding political commentary and public controversy. He embodied continuity in a country that had been violently severed from its past, yet outside Japan, resentment simmered. In China, Korea, and Southeast Asia regions that had endured Japanese occupation, Hirohito's survival was seen as a failure of justice. When he undertook state visits in the 1970s, protests followed him. Placards accused him of evading responsibility. Survivors of wartime atrocities watched as the former emperor was welcomed with diplomatic courtesy. The world had moved on. the wounds had not. Inside Japan, public opinion remained divided. Some view Hirohito as the man who ended the war and saved the nation from annihilation. Others saw him as a passive figure who allowed militarism to flourish, or worse, enabled it through silence. Textbooks struggled to define him. Politicians avoided the subject. The emperor himself offered no confessions, no defenses. Instead, he turned inward. Hirohito devoted increasing time to marine biology, an unlikely pursuit for a man once worshipped as divine. He studied hydrozoans, tiny, delicate sea organisms, and published academic papers under his own name. The symbolism was striking, a former living god examining the smallest forms of life, measuring, classifying, observing without command. Power had given way to precision, myth had given way to microscopes. By the 1980s, Hirohito had become the longest reigning monarch in Japanese history. To an entire generation, he was not the emperor of war, but the emperor of peace, a distant, aging figure associated more with ceremonies than commands. Time softened memory, but it did not erase it. In September 1988, Hirohito fell gravely ill. News bulletins interrupted regular programming. His condition dominated national attention. Japan entered a prolonged vigil, suspended between respect and unresolved history. As days turned to months, the country waited quietly for the final chapter to close. On January 7, 1989, Emperor Hirohito died at the age of 87. His funeral blended ancient Shinto rites with modern state ceremony, mirroring the contradictions of his life. He had ruled as a divine sovereign, surrendered as a human voice, and reigned longest as a symbol stripped of power. Few figures in modern history embodied such profound transformation. And yet, even in death, the questions did not settle. Was Hirohito a war criminal who escaped justice? A constrained monarch trapped by militarism? Or the man who, at the edge of annihilation, chose survival over honor? History offers no verdict, only evidence, silence, and consequence. In the end, Hirohito did not conquer history, he endured it. And Japan, shaped by his silence and his single decisive moment, continues to live with the legacy he left behind.